Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Green Team Podcast. I am Ashaman, and today I'm joined by Panda.
Hello.
JasnahAsABoy.
Hi.
And Hurinfan.
Hi.
On this episode, we are welcoming our good friend Steve back. We'll be asking him a few questions and generally having a good time discussing the first 5 books of the Book of the Fallen. Spoiler warning for the first half of the series, this time around we are aiming to have more of a back and forth rather than a one-sided interview. Time's a-wasting, so let's get cracking, gang.
Welcome back. It's very nice to have you back.
Well, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you again for coming.
Yeah,
Well, thanks for the invitation.
You're the only author I've interviewed, and you happen to be my favorite, so it's really just working out for me over on my end.
Batting 1,000.
So it's going to be all downhill from here? Is that it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's just life, though, right? You peak at some point, and then it starts going down. I think we should ask questions in the order that we appear on the Google Docs. So, Hurin, me, Jasnah, Panda.
Sounds good.
Okay. Steve, what have you been reading or enjoying lately?
Oh, what have I been reading? I haven't been reading much. What's the last thing I read? It's a non-fiction book. Man, I don't even know where it is. It's around here somewhere. It was a book on sort of interpretations on the evolution of beer and wine as they relate to spiritual and religious practices throughout cultures, and how the earliest sort of descriptions of the drinking of beer and wine actually is not, or rather, it is describing something that is not what we would recognize as beer or wine, because it was probably heavily mixed with hallucinogenic additives. And so the drinking of both beer and wine were ritualistic activities that probably included a lot of sort of spiritual engagement on some level. And so the author is basically tracking this through time, from before the Dionysian sort of movement and all the way up. And of course, what's happening in archaeology is we're now able to, look at a potsherd, and look at the inside of it and do an analysis and actually determine what was in that pot before it broke. And so this is actually opening up a whole new sort of area of study. Well, it's been open for a while, but it's, a lot of grad students now who are specializing in this are able to go into the labs of their university and find stuff in old cardboard boxes and re-examine them. And I think that's going to change a lot of things as we move on.
Is it anything like the Immortality Key?
It's similar to it, yes. I
saw you mentioned
the Religion with No
a few
Name, I
months
think,
back.
is the subtitle of it. That's probably it. Yeah, it's a fabulous book. Fabulous book.
Does sound really interesting. I took a course on anthropology, specifically on religion and society.
Mm-hmm.
And they never mentioned it. I don't think we ever mentioned alcohol in the course. Although, of course, hallucinogenics played a big part.
Yeah.
The entire experience was...
Yeah, I think there's resistance to it because basically he ties it into Christian religious practices regarding the wafer and the wine, and where that originated within a Roman context, but then preceding that, going all the way back to the Greeks. And so there was a lot of resistance by the church early on, because the practitioners and the people who prepared these things, first of all, were mostly women, not men. And so that was, after the Council of Nicaea or whatever, after Christianity became the state religion, it became very much a patriarchal organization. And so a lot of the witch trials that, were then seen later are all sort of part of the same package of suppression of chthonic knowledge that was held by usually women, and was part of the religious practice of Christianity early on, but it was then later suppressed.
Does it talk about small-scale societies and their use of alcohol at all, or is that more of a side topic?
No, it's talking about basically a little bit about beer, because the same practice seemed to have been applied to beer as well, but it fell away when wine took over. So it's looking at some of the major, civilizations that arose in those areas, and how the story got passed on from one generation to the next and from one civilization to the next.
I think that's really interesting and fun. Panda said she wanted to bring out your fun side.
I did, yes.
Okay, so my turn. I know growing up in the Canadian school system, every Remembrance Day, we would read In Flanders Fields.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you had that experience growing up, but I was just wondering, did it affect your writing of the Book of the Fallen at all? Or if not, what's your opinion on the similarities between it and your writing in terms of theme?
Did it affect it? I'm sure it did. I can't draw a direct line between the two. I know when I lived in the UK, a number of times we visited the Imperial War Museum, and there's a huge interactive display of they recreated one of the trenches basically, and you can walk down into the trench. And then the poetry is up there on the walls, along with the photographs and all the rest. And yeah, that has a pretty profound effect. It would be very strange if it didn't. So yes, I suspect you're right. I suspect, at least when I was growing up, the way Canadian schools approached Remembrance Day would have had an effect, I'm sure.
I always cried when I was in elementary school during it, because World War I and World War II have such stark and horrifying imagery associated with them that it's hard not to be affected. And that's probably one of the reasons why I connect so much with your writing, because like that same kind of imagery shines through a lot, especially when magic is involved. I think.
Yeah, I don't know if you've gotten there yet, but here's something for veterans of the series to have fun with. There are at least 2 scenes in the entire series where a character is walking the battlefields of World War I.
That actually reminds me of one thing. I've seen you. I've read a lot of things that reminded me of certain things in World War I, with the exception of all the mud. I think that's not something that I've noticed. I want to see you do something like Passchendaele.
Well, you haven't got there yet, so
okay. I probably wasn't paying close enough attention then.
No, I mean, when you get to Reaper's Gale, you'll see something like that.
Okay.
Or have you read the whole series?
Have
you read the whole series?
I have, but it was when I was in high school. So
right. Okay,
I missed some things, and I didn't read as critically as I do now.
Okay. Yeah, there's a whole battle that takes place in mud in Reaper's Gale.
Jasnah.
So, how do you break up one of your Malazan books? Nearly all of them have 24-ish chapters, regardless of length. And Gardens of the Moons has 7 books, but the rest have 4. Or The God Is Not Willing has 3. So what's the method there?
I don't know. I never planned it that way until I realized that the way I was mapping out... I mean, Gardens of the Moon is different because it's the first one. So it's me finding my footing. But by the second one, I think the 24-chapter, 4-book format sort of fell into place. And, if The God Is Not Willing had been 250 pages longer, it would have been 4 parts. So that's why it's 3 parts. And I don't know why, but for whatever reason, that was a structure I could work with. And I could sort of plan and map things out in my head to sort of bring all the converging elements together in the 4th book. But it would take me the first 3 to set things up. I know, it's peculiar. And sometimes, initially, I think on initial drafts, I wasn't even thinking in terms of 24 chapters. And they just kept coming out at 24 chapters. So I figured, all right, I'll stick with that then.
There is one person on our Discord that... at least one person on Discord that doesn't understand your chapter system and gets really frustrated because of it.
In what way don't they understand it?
Panda can probably explain it better, because I think she has some of the same concern. No?
No.
Okay, let me see if I can find it. I'll get back to you, pretty soon.
Are you talking about Soul?
It's either that or Lady Sweden.
I think Soul complained that the structure or the pacing, I suppose, is that it kind of looks more like an entire book where the rising action is in the center and it kind of tapers off.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. Because I approach each chapter as if it were a short story, and so that's how I structure them. So
I knew you were going to say
denouement-
that.
What?
I said I knew you were going to say that. Sorry.
Oh well, the denouement is crucial to a short story, and of course, if you're doing it as part of a novel or in a chapter, you have more room for that denouement to actually be explored further. And then in the process of that, I'm setting up the next whatever is to come. So it has sort of that dual function there. And quite often even the sections within a chapter are kind of mini short stories.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just how I write. That's how I learned.
Yeah, there was a discussion about because a lot of readers like to stop, pause reading at the end of a chapter, but some of your chapters are just really long.
Yep, they are.
And so it's just like,
Wait till Bone Hunters.
Yeah.
wherever there's a break, then that's where we'll pause.
Yeah, and there's also an element to which the decisions that the publisher makes in terms of layout has bearing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I think there's electronic versions where the 3 little asterisks or 5 asterisks that breaks up the section.
Oh yes.
are actually gone.
Oh.
And so all you have is an extra space, like one space between sections. And that can be easily missed when you're reading on a reader.
Yeah.
And so, people feel like they've been thrown all over the place in terms of shifts of setting and shifts of point of view.
On audiobook, it's even worse.
Yeah, when I wrote it, I write it to, every break of section is at least 3 carriage returns. It's at least 6 lines with, in the middle of it all, centered are 5 or 3 asterisks, stars. And so I always expected that, that format would be followed by the publishers, and some of them don't.
I've loaned out my copy of Gardens, the physical copy, so I'm reading it to my wife from the Kindle, but thankfully I have the scenes mapped in my head, so I know here's a scene break, and that's when I check, do you want me to keep reading? Because those chapters are long for out loud reading. So
yeah, and I think had I known that was going to happen, I would have shortened the chapters dramatically. I mean, where the stars were, I just simply would have, for the most part, done a new chapter break at that point.
So we would have gotten 48 or 60 chapters.
And so many epigraphs.
Good point. So in that sense, I'm glad I didn't.
well,
it looked right to me on the page as I'm composing it. The breaks are very, very obvious. They're visual breaks, and it never occurred to me that anybody would apply a different sort of dividing method between scenes.
And you definitely can't do the thing where you just write the name of the character's perspective at the top because you like to keep it hidden so long.
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes.
I disagree with AP. I love those books.
How much pressure do you put on yourself when writing the poems that you put for the epigraphs? Because, I imagine it must be a little bit daunting to have to represent the best poets in this world.
Well, some of them, no, a lot of them aren't the best poets, right? If I end up writing, something that I really quite like, I'll probably attribute it to Fisher.
Okay, that's how we know that you are proud of your work.
That's a poem I like.
Okay.
Other ones, I am playing with voice, so sometimes some of these poets are not as deft as others. And use different rhyme sequences or lack thereof, different meter, different everything. And then in other cases, of course, it's not poetry at all. It's just a quote from some, obscure text somewhere. And those can be a lot of fun because
occasionally it's world building information, which Panda loves.
It is, but it's also characterization, but really sort of subtle characterization, because it's basically telling you that this scholar's interpretation is as dubious as anybody else's, and quite often is guided by personal prejudices of some form or another.
Oh yes.
So it's all there to it undercuts itself all the time when I do those quotes.
I specifically remember one of the epigraphs about the Warrens, and it was like the Shadow Warren. It's just like, oh, I can't even remember the exact like wording, but it was very much like, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, do you? So
Yeah,
it felt
and there can
very
be
relatable.
misinformation. Yeah, there can be misinformation in there as well.
I have had to try and explain Warrens, and specifically the Shadow Warrens, so many times over the course of this read. Which, like, I love the complexity and trying to, like, piece things together. But there's a lot of people who just aren't used to that, right? And
Yeah.
things are usually a lot more clear-cut,
Yeah.
which can cause a lot of confusion.
Best I got is it's a spectrum. That's it.
So, one of my favorite epigraphs, I think it was in Memories of Ice. You have somebody casting doubt as to the existence of the Kachin Shamal, and you attribute it to Esli Mono the Dubious.
Yeah, Esli Manat. Esli Manat the Dubious.
So did you come up with the Kachin Shamal, and Eslamont was like, "This is crazy," or like, what's the joke there?
That's certainly possible, but generally, I make up the names as I go along, in terms of who wrote what, and there's, I mean, in the long-standing friendship I have with Cam, there is an element to Cam that's by nature skeptical, and so I was probably just poking him in the ribs on that one.
If we're throwing out our favorite epigraphs, I'll just say that I think "The Sea Does Not Dream of You" is like top tier quotes in fantasy. It's so good.
That one's just recently been analyzed, hasn't it? Yeah.
Great video.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Nice.
For Ashaman, if you want to read bad poetry, you should read Crackpot
Oh
Trail.
my god, it's so funny.
I'll get around to it, I'm sure.
Yep. And you know what? It's actually not easy to write really bad poetry. It's quite challenging.
I believe it.
You gotta deliberately break a whole bunch of rules, and make things as awkward.
Petting a cat backwards for you.
Sorry?
I assume it's like petting a cat backwards for you.
Well, it's just being deliberately awkward, and that can be, it's everything a writer learns is how to sort of smooth out all the wrinkles so that nobody notices. And when you're writing bad sonnets or bad poems, you got to go in the opposite direction and really mess things up badly. I mean, it's a lot of fun, but it turned out to be harder than I thought it would.
Brash fluster.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just curious. What is the origin of the world, the Malazan world, being called Woo?
It came from our gaming, and when Cam was one of the very early games to be set in the Malazan world, and we didn't even think of it as the Malazan world at that time. It was going to be set on the continent of Kwantali, and there was an island that I'd drawn into the map and called Malaz Island that the story eventually pulled us over to. And let's see, we're sharing a flat here in Victoria in BC, both going in the writing program, so going to university, and so we do our our short stories and our coursework and all the rest, and then we'd head home and we would just game and we'd listen to music. And one of the songs, one of the bands that we listened to a lot was Steely Dan. Mm-hmm. And there's a song on there. There's a song by Steely Dan called Dr. Wu, and it's one of my favorite songs of theirs. And so I guess that was sitting in the background when Cam was writing up his character of the character who would become the Emperor. And the original name for his character was Dr. Wu. And so from there, it just went to the world of Wu as our means of I guess almost making sure we never took things too seriously. Because I mean, gaming's about having a lot of fun. Later on, yes, I remember dragging gamers, groups of gamers through absolute hell. But even then, you still get great scenes and fun scenes and all the rest. But Cam and I mean, we spent we spent a lot of time laughing when we were doing our games, and and that's sort of what invites things like the character of the Emperor of Amianus, Dr. Wu, and characters like Krupp and people like that, because that sort of, it drags the fun element into the story, into the narrative itself, and so they're kind of representative of our gaming, the way they are portrayed in the books.
I really like the way I like the scenes you wrote in Willful Child with the extended gaming sessions that are
with the Marines.
Yeah.
Oh dear, yes.
That actually sort of reminds me of, I don't think I'd call it a criticism, but an observation that I had on Krupp recently.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to exist more separate from the narrative than I think any other character. Like he sort of floats above it in a sense, and he's very aware of like the structure of what's going on, and
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and he feels like an immortal character, sort of. Like, he's not going to get shanked in an alleyway.
Well, there's an element to him that it makes him a meta character as well. And, that would maybe become more apparent as you continue on in the series.
And I'll let you go in 1 second here, but... and
I was just saying 8.
Oh. This is one reason why, out of all the so-called mad genius characters, I like Tehil the most, because he very much feels grounded in the narrative and very like, obviously he's fallible and he's killable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's not a game character. He was never role played. Of all those characters, who was role played? Very briefly, just before Cam and I ended up moving in different directions, quite physically. I think Cam played Rulad. He might have played Rulad. I'd have to ask him, but I think he may have. And we never finished that campaign, but it was one we had started. And I can't remember how far we got in it either. Chances are he remembers even less. So, it's all in a gray haze of us getting way too old.
But you remember the highlights, I'm sure.
I think I was running the game. Because I remember creating the sword that Rulad would inherit. And I don't remember if what happened in the novel is similar to what happened in the game in terms of how he acquires it. Probably not. But definitely the notion of that weapon was thrown into Cam's lap as Rulad, I think. And so we did proceed a little bit on that.
I remember my first time through Midnight Times, I was very, very scared that you were going to kill Tehil. So thank you for that.
I have more to comment on Tehil, but it'll need to wait until after we read Dust of Dreams.
Not that he's alive then.
Yeah, I was just going to say. Now I know he doesn't die in Reaper's Dale.
That may or may not be revealed about Tehil that may or may not be relevant to the grand plot of the series by Dust of Dreams.
Thanks for that.
So, Steve, how are your personal projects going? So, like, last time we talked, you said you were working on a sci-fi series, and Ash and I and 61 other people are eagerly awaiting Walk in Shadow.
Yeah, well, that's proceeding nicely. It's made a big difference that, at least here in Victoria, if you're double vaccinated, you can sit in a cafe and work. And so I've gotten back to that, and that's been really nice. And so the book's ripping along. The sci-fi series has been proceeding. It goes slow because a lot of it is involving literally building sets electronically anyways. And so that takes time. And we're still sort of hammering on the script back and forth and making changes. I've just started a very strange little time travel novel, which I'm actually writing at home while I watch hockey or baseball with the sound turned off. I just sit and type. There's a font I found on Pages called American Typewriter, which I absolutely adore. And it's weird, but a font can actually make all the difference in how you proceed and whether or not you can be sort of blocked or intimidated or whatever. American Typewriter looks looks just what it says. It looks like an old typewriter kind of font, and it's it calls me back to when I was first starting writing, working on an Olympia Report electric typewriter, and it's just, yeah, it's a gorgeous font. So I started writing that one, and it's been ripping along. I've been working on it for 3 weeks, and I guess I'm close to 45,000 words already.
Wow.
So it's just, yeah, it's skating along nicely.
Eagerly await.
That will make a lot of fans happy.
I don't know. It's science fiction, right? It's time travel, so we'll see.
Time travel is a dangerous tool to
Isn't it?
use in writing.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Okay, so Terry Pratchett, who I know you haven't read, but writer of Discworld, he spoke about how he wrote from a place of deep anger.
Mm-hmm.
What emotion do you draw from primarily when writing, if any?
I think I'm there with him on that one. I remember having a crisis about this when I was first starting writing here at University of Victoria. And my instructor was a Canadian writer named Jack Hodgins, an island writer. And the kind of novels and stories he wrote, they were just sort of very delightful, very filled with life and exuberant and, just kind of pleasing, if you will. And then I'd look at my short stories and I just saw nothing but sort of white rage, blind rage. And so I had this sort of crisis saying, well, if this is the well I'm drawing from, is this a good thing? And so I remember sitting in his office and he said, wherever you draw from is what you draw from, and don't fight it. And always recognize that in the writing process, you are going to transform it in some way or another. And so, yeah, I think anger is definitely a driving force. And I think a lot of what I explored in the Malazan series is my means of dealing with it and finding a way around it, and hopefully sort of rediscovering faith in the best of humanity and the best in humanity. So it's every work is an internal dialogue externalized on the page, and that's the dialogue that the author has with him or herself and their belief systems. So you test that with your stories and your characters and everything else, and hopefully something a little more rounded sort of comes out the other end, as opposed to walking away with your convictions confirmed by what you wrote. I would be very suspicious if my belief systems were confirmed, and I would be very suspicious of writing characters like that, because you almost lose objectivity at that point. So it was more a case of, I'm going to approach these issues and these subject matter from every angle I could possibly think of, and create characters who would tackle it in ways I wouldn't, and then see where that takes me. So I'd say I'm not surprised that, and I'm aware of the quote about Pratchett. I'm not surprised. If you listen to interviews with comedians, for example, so anybody writing, anybody doing comedy, they're coming from a very tortured place generally, and it's as if their visceral response is, you have your choice: you laugh or you cry, and they choose to laugh, or at least they make others laugh.
There's a famous philosopher who has said that, I think, right?
Probably.
I know that my experience reading your work, it feels like you're one of those people who can't turn away from the ugly things, and I think a lot of people can. They choose to ignore it, and like that helps them function. And I'm one of those people that can't turn it off either, and it's very much a struggle for me dealing with all the ugliness. And yeah, it makes me angry too. So I think explorations like that on the page are great for helping other people process these feelings as well. And while they're by no means resolved in me, and I don't know if they ever will be.
No, they're not resolved in me either. But also, we do turn away. All of us do every day.
Yes.
There's only so much you can manage. There's only so much you can handle, and we have to be quite forgiving of ourselves in that respect. It's just there are limits, and each person has that set limit on things.
I think Onrak is the one who says something about taking on the pain of someone else. yeah, he starts the series, he's very closed off. He doesn't want to hear anybody's stories because he's in so much pain himself. But
Yeah.
of course, Troll breaks down his walls.
Yeah, which friendship can do, right? And that's sort of, that's an exploration of friendship for sure.
And I think when you meet someone, I'm of the opinion that Troll is maybe the most virtuous person in the series. I think when you meet someone like that, they can really break through in ways that almost no one else can.
Yeah, I think there are people like that for sure. And I know I've met certainly people that just, there's an authenticity about them. There's an integrity about them. And it shines, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And this is sort of dark, but growing up, there was a man in my church group who lost his entire family to a fire, and I don't know how he survived it, but he remarried and he had more kids, but yeah, he was like one of those guys. You could tell that he's been through basically the worst that the world has to offer, and yet so kind, so genuine, just like heart as big as a mountain.
And he continued going to church?
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, I can't fathom how he coped with it.
No.
So Jasnah, I think you have another question.
So yeah. So when we were dividing up the questions, I love House of Chains and I love the Bartleby novellas, so I just took them all. And so here's the first House of Chains question. In House of Chains, Kalam gets an Otatarl knife from a high-ranking member of the Chain of Dogs. And I was just wondering, or we were just wondering whose knife it was.
No idea. No idea.
That's what I thought you'd say.
No, I mean, sometimes you plan things and, if you need to, and if the opportunity arises, you can come back to it and elaborate on it or, create some big reveal or whatever. So I think that was what I just sort of threw into his hands and then basically forgot about.
So the follow-up to that is, so this one actually, I put this in here after I watched, I forget what channel it was on, but there were 3 women on YouTube who recently did a video about the first half of the Malazan series. One of them is my friend Joanna. And,
it's a fantastic video.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful video. Yeah.
And she said that if she had a chance to ask you, to interview you, she'd ask you this question. I talked to her this morning and told her I was going to ask you. So the question was, did Felison realize as she was being cut down by Tavor that Tavor didn't know it was Felison that she was killing? At the end of in one of the best endings of any book that I've ever read, by the way. I cried so much.
I'd have to sort of look at the text, but my instincts tell me no. But at the same time, there was probably a part of her that would ask, well, why didn't you recognize me? How could you not recognize me? And I think those two things are clashing within her at that time.
And in my opinion, she wasn't quite lucid either. Very much in an exhausted state, just after being freed from the influence of a venomous goddess. I wouldn't be in my right mind.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, but I wanted an element of clarity to her internal monologue, and hopefully I reached that element. But it's always the case, I think, that the writer's instinct is to give to flesh out, to add to things. But I have found that sometimes the greatest impact is to refrain from doing so, to be as curse, if you will, as you possibly can be in that moment, because then it takes the words that are given and adds so much more weight to them, because they're not, there's no fat packed around them at all. I remember, again, it's a kind of a creative process, but it's just, you want to rein yourself in when the instincts, or you sense that if you take this too far, you're venturing into melodrama. And so you have to rein it in and really, tighten your grip on the reins and be very, very careful about how you're going to portray things. I think I really discovered that with the end of Dead House Gates, and also with Corlat in Memories of Ice. That's sort of where that lesson really hit home for me. And so by the time I got to the end of the fourth book, I was fairly confident that this was the direction I would have to take for that scene.
Corlat's one of my favorites.
I think that the Teist Andy could have gone very wrong if you hadn't realized the balance there.
Yeah.
Just been like a bunch of edgelords who no one could relate with.
Yeah. Goth kids.
Yeah, the stereotypical D&D rogue that newbie players sometimes make.
Okay, so I have questions about character names. And we've got some really fun ones. We've got some ones that are very similar to each other.
Baruch?
I'm curious, how do you go about picking character names? I think sometimes you pick them because, especially like for the Marines, like they're pretty straightforward in terms of like, well, this person is named Bottle. This person is named, it escapes me right now, Fiddler.
Smiles.
Well,
Blend.
I'm not taking credit for any of those. Bottle, Smiles, Tar, and Korik were all characters named by the players who wrote them up. So obviously they were all familiar with the Malazan setting because they'd gamed in it before. So they knew the conventions, the naming conventions for the Marines. And so I guess maybe with the exception of Korik, the rest, were right on board with how Brazen Tooth would have named these Marines.
Nice. Yeah. And you do reuse names on occasion, Pearl being the most prominent one.
Yeah, it was kind of a mistake, but it's done. It's done. Nothing I can do about it now.
And then you use names that are similar. So there's Malik, there's Ralik. Is there rhyme or reason? Is there any like naming convention pattern there?
No, probably not. Malik Rel was a fictionally created character. Ralik was a character I rolled up for Cam's game set in Darujistan.
Okay.
No, it's probably just a failing of my imagination. So.
Well, when you got 1,000 characters,
that is true.
That happens. Right? Let's face it. The ultimate conceit about all this is that there aren't repeated names. If you think about it, right? How many Johns are out there? How many Alices are out there?
Yeah.
George R. R. Martin got it right.
Yeah. So the Malazan world's a bit unique in that respect, that everybody has their own name and nobody else ever repeats it. Unless they deliberately do so, like Felicin and Felicin Younger.
Yeah, I did. It's just start getting curious for some of the names and started Googling, like, what does this word mean? And I don't know if this is intentional, but troll, the word in its origin means prostitute. Was that at all?
No.
No. Okay.
No. So sometimes I am aware of. That certain words have certain meanings in different languages. Sometimes they're place names that I just saw on a map of archaeology sites, prehistoric sites. I just like the name, and so I would just pluck it and make use of it.
Sounds like a true DM.
Yeah. I mean, but at the same time, you don't want it too closely culturally affiliated. So, for example, I really like a lot of the name constructions in Sanskrit. And so characters like Anomander and Nimander, these are all derived from that basic root language. And I love the rhythmic elements of those names. So Scabandary, all these things, they're all, and of course they're all related to the Teist. So
they have metal names.
Kilmandaros is another one. Right,
that's a good one. Can you pronounce Korab's full name for us?
Okay. Korab Bilan Thenuilas?
I always say Korab Bilan Thenualis.
Yeah, that works. That's perfect.
Okay.
Um, yeah, listeners like or one of our listeners, Circle Breaker, he says that he really likes Scabendari, Blood Eye, as a name,
Mm,
which
yeah,
I have some trouble pronouncing Scabendari, so I call him Scabby.
that's fine. Scabby works.
How about Skara?
Scara.
I think we should really revive the practice of giving people titles like Blood Eye just off the cuff, like Silchus Ruin did.
And then it just sticks for like
It
thousands
just
of
sticks,
years.
yeah, for hundreds of thousands of years. He's Blood Eye now.
Yeah,
I guess he
poor
was
guy.
proud of the name, eh?
I guess. I don't know.
One of the names that really stood out was Stani was it
Manakis.
Manakis.
Sonny Manakis. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Typically a lot of characters are just like first names or just like one prominent name.
Mhm.
Is there a reason why Stani gets a cool last name?
No, they just seem to fit together nicely, and I guess I don't know. Something about it was just sort of easier to say
Mm.
than just using a single name.
Was it an apology for her being put in the fridge?
Oh dear, no.
I'm kidding. I don't.
No. Yeah, I mean, probably invented on the fly. Gruntle probably came first, Harlow second, and then Stani.
Nice.
Quite often, the name decisions relate to the people they hang out with as well. You want them all to fit well, nicely together.
Mm-hmm. Although I do have to say, I had a lot of trouble remembering Troll and Hull, like who was saying what.
Right. Yeah.
Kieran?
Did you get a chance to watch Dune yet?
Not yet. Not yet. I'm waiting probably another week and a half or so for the cinema to empty out during the day, and then I'll the IMAX, and I'll head over and watch it for sure.
I am absolutely convinced that you'll love it. It is so good and
Don't
so
overhype it for him.
faithful to the book. I mean, okay, Denis Villeneuve, excellent author, auteur of cinema. If you like Blade Runner 2049, no way you won't like this, I would say.
All right.
Did you like Blade Runner 2049?
I did.
Okay.
I like the pace of it, actually. Everybody says it was too
Yeah, me
slow.
too.
I like slow paced stuff.
Oh, same.
Dune is perfect.
Yeah.
Right.
If your books were adapted into like a series of television or movies, like what major changes do you think would have to be made?
We'd have to run. Cam and I already discussed this because we got close at one point with a production company, and we knew that we would create a new through line for Tavor, picking up where we left her in the opening of Gardens of the Moon and following her trajectory to becoming adjunct. So she would have to have her storyline, which would then open things up to more of Lacine, Topper, Pearl, other characters like that. So that's one of the major changes. And of course, you would have to conflate characters, and that's just how it's done.
What do you think of animation?
No thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. You know what? People seem to think that animation's easier. It's not. It's pretty labor intensive. If you want to really do a good job at it. You'll note. I've actually been watching Cowboy Bebop, which actually has been a lot of fun to watch. But
The music.
music's great. But it's and visually it's quite arresting. But at the same time, you can see that shortcuts have to be made, and it's just it's the way it is for animation. You get your backdrops, and then you get your movement basically related to the main characters, and everything else just drops behind those characters. So to animate everybody is no easy task. So quite often, when they've got shots of the streets and stuff like that, they're stills. They're not animated as such. And I mean, it's a particular style, and it works really well, I think, for science fiction and Blade Runner style, dystopic, landscapes and all the rest. The only fantasy animation that I actually was quite impressed with was the one done by Frank Frazetta many years ago. He's the only animator I've ever seen who could actually pull off a character running and make it look real. But again, that was immensely labor intensive on his part. So, he could do one. He couldn't do, 20 of them or whatever.
My personal ideal in a perfect world where Philosopher Kings rule would be if it was adapted into a bunch of plays, because I think that fits your style so well, like characters and their dialogue, and I think being able to react in real time to the audience like good actors can do. I think that would be a lot of fun.
It's interesting. I mean, I certainly saw Midnight Tides as potentially being the most adaptable to the stage. I mean, it was lifting a lot from Shakespeare anyway, so, that kind of setup.
I made so many Hamlet comparisons.
Yeah. Beauclerk and Cobra Brooch would probably be a lot of fun on stage. Yeah. Waiting to eat Godot. Yeah.
So obviously, compassion and forgiveness are probably the central themes of Malazan. Do you ever think someone can be past forgiveness? Does punishment factor into your ideals as the right thing to do to someone who has done you wrong?
I think in a very general sense, punishment is not there to disadvantage the one being punished. It's there to satisfy the one who feels that punishment is demanded of something. So it's to be witnessed, if you will, and that's generally how I think it operates for most people, and maybe even in our system, our legal system, where if somebody commits a crime and is convicted of that crime, then we have to be aware, and we have to almost witness their incarceration. And yeah, I mean, you see that with death row, where the execution has to have witnesses. People have to see it done. I mean, it's ghastly, it's barbaric, but that's kind of how it's done. So I think that sort of acknowledges that aspect of that punishment is a thing to be witnessed for the benefit of those witnesses and the society and culture that they live in. Are some crimes unforgivable? Well, yeah, I would think so. And I think it needs to be recognized that one should not expect forgiveness, because people are only capable of what they're capable of, and the extent to which they have been harmed. I mean, there is no monetary value. The legal system attempts that, but generally, these are things that a person has to deal with on a non-materialistic sort of context, and so in that sense, to see the punishment is as much ritualistic for the society, and then the person participates in that in the same fashion that funerals exist, all through virtually every culture. That grieving has to be sort of, well, not has to be, but is best served collectively, even though everybody there recognizes that they're going to go home at the end of that day and experience a very private grief. But the two, I think, need to be there. And I know a lot of people, I know somebody, very close to me, who's lost somebody to COVID and has been unable to get across to their home country in order for a proper funeral. And it's been very difficult because of that. So, that kind of stuff it's needed. It's needed.
So I have a follow-up question to that then.
Sure.
So at the end of Memories of Ice, the Panian Seer is given a second chance. And in my opinion, he probably does some of the most atrocious acts in the entire series. Memories of Ice is full of horrifying imagery, like the Children of the Dead Sea and such. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it was wrong to give him a second chance. I think that was the right thing to do. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I had no choice. Given the thematic importance of Itkovian's actions, basically his argument is, to embrace all, and to give compassion freely. So if I hadn't have done that, if I had turned around and had a character, kill the Panian Domin, that undercuts everything that Itkovian stood for. So thematically, it had to be unified to what Itkovian did.
Okay, good answer.
But it seems like in other places in the Book of the Fallen, but also in the Bachelane novellas, that you kind of like push back a little bit on the absolutism of Ikovian's freely given compassion.
Yes. Yep.
So, where you end up on that question, or if I'm not allowed to know that because I haven't read The Crippled God yet.
Where do I end up on that? I end up all over the freaking place. I mean, it's got to be contextual, and then defaulting to what one is capable of managing and handling and living with. So no, I don't have any answers. I don't have Ikovian's certitude on this subject matter at all.
Not many do.
Yeah,
that's fair.
Yeah, it's easy to take a hard stance, but then there are specific cases like what's his name in House of Change, the Shadow. Yeah, him. And it's hard not to feel really good when he's killed by his testicles getting ripped off and shoved in his mouth, and then Hood torturing him forever.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
But yeah, at the same time, like, I'm super conflicted on it personally. Although, of course, emotionally, it does feel very good.
That's actually a good segue to my next question, which is, at what point in writing the series did you know how the series was going to end?
Oh, early on. By the time I started revising Gardens of the Moon after the 8-year gap of it sitting on the shelf, I knew where it was going. And I had some final scenes that I knew I had to get to. And it was just a process then of writing the books as fast as I humanly could.
So, regarding the Bachelane and Corball Brooch novellas, how closely do the views of Avis, Diddy, and Flicker on art in general, and on his own art in particular, represent your views on your work with Malazan and the relationship between your work and its general audience? Is Flicker a pure authorial insert, or, I mean, obviously without the assassination bit, or do your opinions differ from his, and if so, by how much?
I plead the fifth on that
one. So there's probably no point in me reading a specific paragraph and asking if it's about the Book of the Fallen.
Go ahead.
I was, depending on your answer, I was not going to. So it says, the name of Avis, Diddy, and Flicker is not entirely unknown among the purveyors of entertainment, if not culture, throughout 7 cities. And by virtue of living as long as I have, I am regarded with some modest veneration. This has not yielded vast wealth, not by any measure beyond that of personal satisfaction, at the canon of words marking a lifetime's effort. And as everyone knows, satisfaction is a wavering measure in one's own mind, as quick to pale as it is to glow. If I now choose to stand full behind this faint canon, and its even fainter reputation, well, the stance is not precisely comfortable.
Well, that's typical Avis Flicker. That voice, you just reminded me of it. It's, man, he's full of shit sometimes, isn't he? But man, was he fun to write. I mean, more fun to write than I think any other character, any other voice. You've got to take everything he says with a grain of salt. And that's about as much as I can do in terms of responding to that particular quote. Because it's one of those things where you're mixing up true elements with absolute false modesty on his part, and the performance that he is delivering, for his audience at that moment.
Right.
Where everybody is supposed to pull out the violins at this point. So he's aware of all of this and all the manipulation that he's doing. It's one of the most self-aware voices, even more so than Krupp. I think Flicker is the most self-aware narrative voice I've ever used.
And maybe the self-awareness and the fun that you had writing him made me think it was pure authorial insert when I was reading it. But I won't read the other one because it's really long, but he responds to a woman who just wants to get to the action and wants like short stories and doesn't want all that long exposition. Was that maybe a response to some criticisms about the Book of the Fallen? I swear I'll leave you alone after this reiteration of my question.
Well, anything's possible.
I think Crack Bottrell is one of the funniest and best things you've written.
Which?
and
Crackpot Trail?
Crackpot Trail, yeah.
Thank you.
Relating to taking characters in various interpretations with varying degrees of confidence, it was very fun for me, and still is very fun for me and Hurin, to when Panda and Jasnah were getting acclimatized to the series, to say, oh, this person is saying this thing, so that means that. And we would always respond with, well, this person thinks that, or they claim they do. And it frustrates Jasnah to no end when we're talking about, like, world-building stuff. Or, like, specifically Warrens, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, a lot of unreliable narration going on here. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that really frustrated me was Midnight Tides, because early on in the book, Bug says that the Errant is the personification of the collective personification of the Forkrel Assail into like a single individual. So I was like, oh, that's what the Errant is. Explanation done, and I didn't like look for any of the mystery elements that actually would point to who the Errant would be after that, because I was like, I believe Bug, which I don't know how I made that mistake after 4 books of The Fallen, but
Also famously difficult to grok is the relationship between Curled Emerlon, Curled Ghislaine, and Curled Leosin, and the child Warrens that they have and how
It's a
interconnected
spectrum.
they all are. Yeah.
They're just all connected, and it's just a spectrum. That's all.
Yeah, and once I finish Walk in Shadow, I guess, and you read, if you ever read the Carcanis trilogy, you'll get a few questions answered.
That might take me a while.
I don't think she would like it.
That might take me a decade to get to.
my plan is as soon as I finish The Crippled God to pick up... Oh, I guess I better finish Novels of the Malazan Empire first. But as soon as I can get there, pick up Carcanis and go. I won't be paced at the podcast anymore, so I can just run with it as slow or fast as I want to.
See, I am a mood person. I read based on my mood. And so this whole podcast project has been a real struggle for me because I'm like, no, I gotta read these things on a schedule. And they're not quick. So I gotta find breaks so that I can, get in some quicker paced, lighter fare.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, environmentalist themes are really prevalent in your series. How pessimistic or optimistic are you about, our future?
No, we're
Yo! It's the same view I have. Doomerism is very prevalent.
Afraid so, yeah.
Yeah, I was reading an article in the Seattle Times talking about how the airline industry is really facing a challenge with a lot of pressure to be, carbon neutral. And just reading some of the responses from the spokespeople for the airlines, it's like, you already realized this decades ago.
Yeah.
And now you're still not quite acknowledging that, very likely air travel will need to be reduced, at least for a period of time. But
well, I mean, unless here in Victoria, we have a float plane service that goes right out of the harbor over to Vancouver and to Seattle, and they've tested just before COVID. They were testing the battery run float plane, so entirely electric, which is a bit scary to think about, but at the same time, it may be one direction that one can go with these things.
Yeah.
Hopefully, at least some of us survived the water wars.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a dangerous question for me to ask. It is probably the most contentious topic that has come on the podcast, and there's no sign of it resolving. So I'll be very careful with how I talk about it. What are your thoughts on the Jagat Imas conflict? Do you think do you think one side is clearly in the wrong over another?
Huh. It's not an issue I've actually heard brought up. Well, in a broad respect, and I think, who was it, Ruthin Bad or Niflrod? one of them talked about the collective versus the individual, and the fact that the Talana Mass are the collective taken to its extreme, and the Jagut are the individual taken to its extreme. Taken to the extreme for the Jagut to such an extent that even the notion of civilization and a cohesive culture ceased to operate as far as they were concerned. So their level of solitude is only possible because they have magical abilities. I mean, and insanity is one of the consequences of that level of solitude anyways. So a lot of the Jagut are bat crazy in some form or another. And then the other extreme, of course, is the surrendering of individual will to a collective cause that is so vast and so overarching that it supplants even death, at which point individual memories begin to disappear because they're no longer relevant. So I would say that the point of the two extremes is to explore them and to engage in the possible, in the consequences of those extremes, and then decide wherever you want to decide to, where's the middle for you, which side are you going to angle towards in terms of the life choices that are made there. But it's very much, a metaphor that's taken to its extreme.
Very extreme, I would say.
I don't think I could have pushed it further, actually.
No, my thinking on the process is broadly like I can't really condemn either side because of just who they are is so fundamentally incompatible, and the Amas aren't able to effectively combat a Jagut tyrant. When they're in operation, they get manipulated for centuries or millennia, and many of them die, and this makes them very angry. So I can't think of a way to really resolve the conflict without one side either drastically changing their culture, which I don't see happening very easily, or like they somehow go where they can't interact with each other, or one side tries to take out the other. And,
I mean, here's a real world example that might amuse you. This preceded the writing of the books. I was at the University of Iowa in the writer's workshop, and the second year, my wife joined me from the UK, and we were renting the top floor of this big mansion set of flats, and it was a nice enough place so that other writers and their spouses could come and join us for dinner and that kind of stuff. And one of the things we engaged with briefly were games of Risk. So I ended up buying the board game, and games of Risk. I mean, I kind of left those behind when I was 12 years old, but it was just something to do. It was just a lot of fun. And one of my fellow student writers, a guy named Bill, was in the game, and a couple of other people were in the game, and I made a verbal deal with Bill, and then promptly backstabbed him and took him out. And it's a game, right?
Yep.
He personally never forgave me for that.
No!
I've had that happen to me as well.
He never forgave me. To this day, I bet. If I were to run into him, he'd just point his finger at me and you. So the Talana Mass experiencing the betrayal of a false god, a Jagut in the guise of a god, they can never forgive in the same way that Bill can't. So there you go.
And of course it's like the Jagut also are like really bad at self-policing because of like their individualism. So like even though like the majority of them are very good and they will sacrifice their lives to take down a tyrant, most of the time they just don't care to monitor the situation, which doesn't help things.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Yeah. So it's I think one of the most fascinating conflicts that you bring up. I am alone in thinking that there is, I think, clear ambiguity, and I don't want to misrepresent their arguments, but Hurin and Jasnah are essentially on the side that genocide is wrong, flat out, so the Talani Mas are monsters, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I wouldn't argue that.
I'm generally I'm I generally, in the individualism versus collectivism, I find myself on the collectivism side. And yeah, in this conflict, I absolutely take the Jackut's position.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, and we have argued for hours about this to no resolution.
Too much.
And we've kind of had to put a moratorium on the topic because otherwise it will just take over the podcast episodes and we won't talk about anything else.
Interesting.
So, is the humor in the Bockelin novellas or with Tejo and Bug influenced by the show Blackadder at all?
I would elements of Blackadder, sure, but I would have to just sort of run through a list of all the things that I found, influential in those things. One of them would be George MacDonald Fraser's Flashman, where the lesson of those books is you can take the most reprehensible character imaginable and yet make fantastic books centered on that character. And that was a good lesson. And I took that for Bockelin and Corporal Broach. But a lot of the inspiration for the story was, well, first of all, the two characters came out of a game that I rolled up those characters. But was Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and Grey Mouser. I wanted to sort of do a modern version of Fafhrd and Grey Mouser, but sort of flip the story. And then a bit of Wooster and Jeeves was thrown in, with the Emancipar Reese. So it's kind of an amalgam of all these things.
Yeah, I want to read can you say the name of it again? The Swords and Sorcery duo? It's
Fafhrd and Grey Mouser?
Yeah. I've been wanting to read those. They're like high on my to-be-read pile. Because
they're great. And they're funny as well. Yeah.
Because of your writings with Bockelin and Corporal Broach, but also because of a character who I understand will appear in the next Bockelin and Corporal Broach novella I will read, which is Joe Abercrombie, who does his own homage to their those books.
Has he? That's cool.
Yeah, it's in his short stories collection for the First Law.
Right.
I can't wait to see put him through the ringer.
Yeah, they're fabulous stories, and quite unique in the voice and in the way Leiber sort of tackled fantasy through sword and sorcery. They're great reads.
My copy of Upon a Dark and Evil Overlord should be coming soon.
I've just finished all the signing sheets for those. So
you signed one of mine then?
Well, I've signed 300 signing sheets. I have to stick it in the mail and send it back to them. So
thank you.
I'll have to order mine soon.
Some of my favorite sections in the series are the tile and deck readings. When you write that, how much is there just for foreshadowing and how much is there just to F with the reader? Like, I still have a hard time sometimes interpreting it. And it's great.
Well, it's a combination of the two, right? It's I don't want to spell it out. I don't want to make it easy, right? But at the same time, if you're really careful with deconstructing the readings, you can get a lot of the plot out of those readings. So yeah.
Okay, I think I know the answer to this because I think at this point I got a good beat on your writing philosophy. But what is your philosophy on the intersection of tragedy and humor?
Philosophy on it? I don't know if I have a particular philosophy on it. It goes back to what we talked about, you either laugh or cry. That these are sort of universal emotional responses to things that happen around us. And both are equally valid in their proper context, obviously. And they probably both relate to the notion of catharsis, which is, you've just finished Midnight Tides. Well, that's all about catharsis as a novel. So I suspect that I'm thinking in quite Aristotelian terms. So yeah, okay, philosophically.
There are some people that think they're contradictory. I don't think they are. I think, and especially if you were talking about the comedians, like, Robin Williams, he really didn't think they were separate. I'm of the opinion that they're very synergistic, and I think Midnight Tides would be a far weaker book if it just focused on one of the two.
Yeah, agreed.
One of the reasons why I like it so much is because it blends the two so well. And the other great example I go to when thinking of a great blend between the two is Hamlet, because like in the same scene it goes back and forth, and the scene I kept talking about was when Polonius is stabbed through the curtain. Because Hamlet's going insane. he stabs a guy through the curtain because he thinks that they're spies. It ends up being Polonius who promptly says, "I am slain," which is maybe the funniest thing he could say. And then it goes right back to tragic because, all the things that happen. So,
yeah.
In a similar vein, are you a cry reader?
A what reader?
Do you cry when you read?
If the writing's particularly bad, yes. It depends on my state of mind. I mean, to even have the conceit of trying to guide a reader into that emotional state. If I haven't gone there first, then I really have no right to expect that of anyone else. So I have to feel those emotions in the most genuine fashion possible, and then somehow try to distill that onto the page in a way that's not maudlin or melodramatic. And so once you experience those feelings, you got to somehow clear the air and reapply all of those elements of craft related to writing to actually then convey these things in a way that will echo the experiences you've had thinking through those scenes. And quite often everything is down to a single line, and that line's been sitting in my head until, sometimes for multiple books, until I get to it. When you guys get to The Crippled God, we can talk about a couple particular lines that just stayed with me, and that I just had to write my way slowly, methodically towards those lines.
One in particular, I sometimes get choked up just thinking about it. So we could say metaphorically your books are at least one part of Steve's blood, sweat, and tears?
Sure. I mean, it's like I say, it would be churlish to expect that level of emotional engagement out of the reader if I'm not there first.
So, regarding Midnight Tides, we see various possible reactions to corruption and broken systems, exemplified primarily in the Beddock brothers, such as violent revolution in the case of Hull, a sort of civil disobedience / sabotage in the case of Tehol, and a passive reform from within from Briss. What do you think the ethical thing to do is for someone who finds themselves in a corrupt system like the Letheri?
You mean like the Letheri? You mean unlike ours? Is that what you...
Yeah, completely different from ours, yeah.
Completely different from ours, right. Man, I don't know. The whole point, with those three characters is to explore how one deals with a dysfunctional or malignant civilization, in the sense that, it's where we find ourselves often. And I don't have the answer. So, I mean, I just took those three options, and I guess if I were to favor one over another, it would be passive resistance.
Like Tehol?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, there's a famous short story called Bartleby the Scrivener. I don't know if you've read that. No, okay, well, it's basically a character who on one day chooses to do nothing, and then continues to choose to do nothing. And what he ends up representing is a fundamental threat to the entire civilization because he chooses to do nothing. It's a brilliant little story, which was rather tragically echoed when the Occupy movement, for example, really landed on Wall Street and in New York, and resisted through passivity. If you've ever seen clips of that stuff, you can see the extent to which they had the crap beaten out of them for doing nothing, which tells you just how vast a threat they actually posed.
Yeah, not trying to get political here, but there's also a similar phenomenon going on in China with the laying flat movement.
Yes.
Which is essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
And another literary example that I read recently is The Lathe of Heaven by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't think I need to say anything more there.
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff.
But I think that the closest you come to condemning one approach is with Hull, and I think it's the right thing to do, because someone like Hull, while his anger may be justified, his actions result in indiscriminate slaughter, and someone like that is like so toxic, because and maybe unfixable, that you can't have a society around people like that, I think.
Well, I took it to its logical conclusion,
and
that's pretty grim. Yeah.
I have one more question, and then we'll go to Panda's rapid fire. Okay, relating to Midnight Tides again, on the other side of the coin, Trull is obviously a character that sees his culture going in a dangerous direction. He feels like he's the only one. He's certainly the only one that makes a big fuss about it in that group, although there are other Tice that resist in their own way. What do you think you should do if you see your culture shifting in a dangerous direction like the Eater?
Oh, man. I don't know. Cultures have mechanisms of control on aberrant behavior. And what they define as aberrant behavior can vary dramatically. So resistance is potentially an extremely dangerous stance to take. And the more stressed the culture is, the more dangerous that stance becomes. So I'm not sure if I have a particular answer on that one. It's more, I guess, you set your own moral compass and you hold to it with as much integrity as possible. And even if your only presence, if the only function of your presence is to serve as an alternative to what's going on around you, then that may have to be enough.
And do you think that someone should be coldly pragmatic, or like Trull does at the end of Midnight Tides, do you think you have to make the effort no matter what?
Again, down to the character and you know their fortitude, if you will, and the choices, what they can live with versus what they can't live with, and I think that's always a personal choice.
I think that's a good note to end our quote not fun section on. Panda, do you want to take it away with the rapid fire questions?
Okay, Steve. So I'm gonna just put 3 minutes on the clock. So it's not forever. And it's going to be this or that. So it's just, what is your preference? I'm going to give you item A, item B. You can think about it as much as you want, or just spew out an answer, whatever comes first. And yeah, here we go.
This is a psychological test, isn't it? I'm gonna
I promise it's not.
Found us out.
Maybe a listener will psychoanalyze you, but that is not the intent.
I hope so.
If you choose not to answer,
Niflrog video.
If you choose not to answer, just say skip. It's fine.
Okay.
All right, here we go. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning or night?
That's ironic because I'm drinking tea right now.
Morning or night?
Night.
For reading, digital or physical books?
Physical.
And for your writing, Tay-hole or bug?
Bug.
Dragons or dinosaurs?
Dragons.
Comedy or drama movies?
Comedy.
Beach or mountain?
Beach.
Zombies or vampires?
Vampires.
Ninjas or pirates?
Pirates.
Guacamole or salsa?
Guacamole.
Baby dressed as animals or animals dressed as humans?
Skip. Sorry, you just creeped me out there.
This is the one that I said I'd be surprised if you had an opinion on.
Passenger or driver?
Driver.
Wine or beer?
Wine.
Red or white?
Red.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
Calling or texting?
Calling.
French fries or onion rings?
French fries.
Or poutine?
No.
No.
No. I might have to revoke your citizenship.
Burger or hot dogs?
Burger.
Would you want a free lunch or a free dessert?
Free lunch.
Snail mail or email?
Email.
Puppies or kittens?
Puppies.
Lake or ocean?
Lake.
Beginning or end?
Skip.
That's it.
And that's it.
That's it
That was interesting.
for this section.
For this rapid fire this or that. We do have some listener questions. Circle Breaker asks you about Babylon 5.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on it? And, do you rewatch it?
I've not rewatched it. I certainly enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to the remake.
Mm. Yeah, didn't they like remaster it and now it's available for streaming?
Yeah, but I thought I'd read somewhere that they're talking about a remake.
That would be interesting.
I could be wrong, but
Okay. This is from Cannon Fodder and is a real question about Midnight Tides and the ritual done by Gothos when he froze that location in time, which basically trapped the holds in stagnation. Is that a correct interpretation? If that ritual froze out the House of Death, does that mean there was no hold of death ever?
That I cannot answer because it's Walk in Shadow is going to be covering a lot of this particular ground. So.
And there are important tidbits that we need to find out later in the series as well.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. And then lastly, we've got Brendan the Battle Stag, which is a very awesome name. What is your favorite comedy? You seem to have a good sense of humor, and that definitely comes through with Tehol and Bug's relationship.
Favorite comedy? Well, let's go from film. I'd say Top Secret. For television, to this day, I can keep watching Get Smart. For books, I struggle with that one. I think the problem is you get when you learn narrative structure, you get messed up as a reader, and sometimes you end up seeing the structural stuff, and it gets in the way of actually enjoying the comedic stuff. So I would be hard pressed. I mean, I do enjoy the Flashman series for its irreverence. George MacDonald Fraser did another novel called The Pirates, standalone, which is completely over the top and a lot of fun. But generally, I tend not to. A lot of writers will do stuff that will have particular scenes that are absolutely, exquisite. Ian M. Banks in his culture novels, quite often his AI ships are just
I've heard.
A blast to read.
They're
an
excellent.
absolute blast. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, have you read The Murderbot Diaries or heard of them by Martha Wells?
No.
I am curious if you ever get the chance or have the time or interest for you to pick up at least the first one and just see how you like it. And they're most of them are
short.
novellas, so they're quick.
Yeah, okay.
All right, that's it.
That concludes this episode. Thank you so much to Steve for coming on the podcast and chatting with us. Thank you to Craig and the Legendarium Podcast for letting us share a piece of their media empire. If you want to join the read-along or contribute listener questions, check us out on the Legendarium's Discord. You can find the link on thelegendarium.com. Also follow us on Twitter, @GreenTeamPod, for updates and fun times. Check out the Legendarium Podcast for Wheel of Time, Cosmere, Lord of the Rings content, and so much more. Thank you to our panelists, Hurin, Jasnah, and Panda. I am Ashaman. Till next time.
Bye.
Okay, cool. And then just a fair warning up front, this one is less structured than the previous time we did with you. And there is a this or that section towards the end that is more rapid fire. And it's just random questions that popped into my head.
She's a very structured person.
I am a very structured person, okay?
Yeah, we're hoping to make this more of like a back and forth discussion.
Sure.
Which
Who
I
needs
think
structure?
should be fun. Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
You're the one who doesn't take notes while you're writing. I don't know how you do that.
That's true.
That's like the opposite of me.
Yeah, she showed me the notes that she was taking for the books once, and it's just like there was stickies in it, and there was just like hundreds of them in the book.
So you do realize then that you took more notes on the Bone Hunters than I did writing it?
I haven't started Bone Hunters yet.
Midnight
I
Tides.
will be, but probably yes.
Right. Okay. So
Especially Bone Hunters.
so what? You just finished Midnight Tides?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We're halfway through, which is amazing
You
for
are.
me because I don't usually read books in the series back to back like this. It would take me normally, without this podcast, it would normally take me like a decade to finish your series.
Took me a decade to write it, so that's okay.
It's also her first epic fantasy, like her big epic fantasy series.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it's a hell of a start.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of the opposite. I slowed way down for the podcast. I would have been like done and rereading if it wasn't for the podcast.
All right.
The books are so good.
Well, thank you.
I just started reading Gardens of the Moon out loud to my wife.
Is she sort of chained in a chair or something? Or?
Well, we read a lot of, like, we were reading Oscar Wilde before that and Robert Jordan.
Right.
And I was just like, all right, we're going to read Malazan. It's better than all this stuff we've been reading. Well, not Oscar Wilde, but, you know, the Robert Jordan. It's better than Robert Jordan. And,
uh-oh, you're going to get in trouble for that one.
you can cut that out if you don't want that heat on the Legendarium brand, but that's my opinion.
Not with a rabid fan base and all the...
Controversy generates discussion.
Does it now?
Yeah.
I have no comments.
Do you plan on watching this series?
Excuse me?
Do you plan on watching the television series?
Oh, the Wheel of Time? Yeah, I'll probably look in on the first one, and then decide from there. I think most people will probably do that. So.
I haven't read those books, so I'm just gonna go in watching the show open-minded.
Yeah, that could be a really good thing, actually. Yeah.
It'll probably be a lot of the fat will be trimmed for the show, so you might get a cleaner narrative that way.
Yeah, and I think that's actually necessary. I mean, if you're going to put something and create a television series based on books, you're basically creating a new media, a new art form. It's not the book, but it's the story, and then you're going to concentrate on and focus on certain things that will propel the story along. Well, that was a cattail. I wasn't sure what that was there.
Yeah, he likes to. He likes it when I do podcasts, and he likes walking in front of my face while I do so, which causes no end of trouble. But I can't really get angry at him because he's just such a nice guy.